The image of the Neanderthal is a stubborn one. We see a hunched figure, hairy and brutish, dragging a club. He grunts. He is a dead end on the human family tree, a clumsy first draft of a person. His tools, we imagine, were simple rocks, just a step above what a chimpanzee might use. He was strong, sure, but not smart. That's the story we've told ourselves for a long time. And like a lot of old stories, it's mostly wrong. The truth is, if we want to know how smart Neanderthals were, we have to look at what they left behind. And what they left behind, more than anything else, are their tools. Stone tools are the hard copies of their thoughts. They are fossilized ideas. When you hold a Neanderthal tool in your hand, you are holding a decision, a plan, a skill passed down through generations. And when we look closely at these objects, the old story of the dumb brute completely falls apart. Their technology wasn't just good enough. It was sophisticated, efficient, and in some cases, surprisingly complex. It reveals a mind that could plan, adapt, and solve problems in ways that were, until recently, thought to be unique to our own species. To understand their tools, you have to understand their world. Neanderthals lived across a huge territory, from Europe to Central Asia. They were around for a very long time, from about 400,000 years ago to about 40,000 years ago. That's a run of over 350,000 years. For perspective, modern civilization is maybe 6,000 years old. They endured multiple ice ages. Their environment was tough. It was often cold and populated with huge, dangerous animals like mammoths, woolly rhinos, and cave bears. Survival wasn't a given. It depended on skill, cooperation, and technology. A simple, smashed rock wasn't going to cut it. You needed a reliable, sharp, and durable toolkit just to get through the day. The main technological tradition associated with Neanderthals is called the Mousterian. It's named after the site of Le Moustier in France, where these kinds of tools were first found in large numbers. The Mousterian wasn't a sudden invention, it grew out of earlier tool traditions. But Neanderthals perfected it, they made it their own. For over 200,000 years, the Mousterian was the standard, high-end technology in our world. And at its heart was a technique that is the single biggest piece of evidence against the dumb brute theory. It's called the Levallois technique. The name sounds fancy, but the idea is what matters. Before Levallois, making a stone tool was mostly about subtraction. You took a big rock, or core, and you chipped pieces off it until the core itself had the shape you wanted. You might get a decent hand axe that way, but the flakes you chipped off were mostly waste. The Levallois technique completely flipped that idea. The goal was not to shape the core. The goal was to shape the flake that you would strike off the core. Think about it this way. Imagine you want a specific triangular tortilla chip from a big lump of dough. Instead of just ripping a piece off, you first knead and pat the entire lump into a specific shape. You flatten the top, you taper the sides. You are preparing it. You are visualizing the final chip before you've even made it. Then, with one perfect slice, you cut off the exact chip you wanted all along. The preparation of the dough was the most important part. That's the Levallois technique in stone. A Neanderthal toolmaker would take a flint nodule. They would carefully chip away at the edges, creating a distinctive tortoiseshell shape. They were creating a platform, they were setting up the angles and the ridges. They were thinking several steps ahead. Then, with one final, precise and forceful strike to the platform, they would detach a flake. This flake was the tool. It was thin, sharp, and a standardized shape and size. It was pre-designed, and the beauty of it was that you could then prepare the core again and strike off another flake and another. It was an incredibly efficient way to produce sharp, useful tools from a single piece of raw material. This is not a simple skill. You can't learn it by just watching once. It requires a deep understanding of how stone fractures. You need to know the right angles, the right amount of force. You have to be able to see the tool inside the rock before you start. This implies planning, it implies foresight, it implies a mental template of the finished product, and it implies teaching. A young Neanderthal had to learn this from an elder. It had to be demonstrated, corrected, and practiced. This is cultural transmission. It's the same way a master carpenter teaches an apprentice. The Levallois technique is a signature of a modern mind at work. So, what did they make with these pre-formed flakes? The Mousterian toolkit was like a Stone Age Swiss Army knife. It had a set of standard, reliable tools for different jobs. There were side scrapers. These were flakes with one long, retouched edge. They were perfect for processing animal hides, for scraping fat and tissue off the skin to make leather for warmth. There were points, triangular flakes that were likely hafted onto wooden shafts to make spears. These were their primary hunting weapons. They weren't throwing spears, but heavy thrusting spears used for up-close encounters with large prey. There were also denticulates, which were flakes with notched, saw-like edges, probably used for working wood. And they still made hand axes, a tool inherited from their ancestors Homo heidelbergensis. But their hand axes were often thinner, more refined, and more symmetrical. It was a multi-purpose tool, a sort of prehistoric cleaver, good for heavy-duty butchery, chopping wood, or digging. The key here is standardization. When an archaeologist finds a Mousterian scraper in France and another one in the Levant, they are recognizably the same type of tool, made in a similar way for a similar purpose. This wasn't just random rock bashing, this was an industry with design standards maintained across vast distances and for immense periods of time. For a long time, the story ended there. Okay, so they had the Levallois technique and a standard toolkit. Impressive, but maybe a bit static. Critics pointed out that the Mousterian toolkit didn't seem to change much for tens of thousands of years. This was used as evidence that they lacked the capacity for innovation that modern humans had. They found a good system, and they just stuck with it endlessly. But again, a closer look at the evidence tells a different story. First, let's talk about materials. Neanderthals were expert geologists. They didn't just use any old rock they found lying around. They knew that for the Levallois technique to work well, you needed high-quality, fine-grained stone like flint or chert, and they would go to great lengths to get it. Archaeological studies have shown that Neanderthals would transport high-quality flint for dozens, sometimes even over 100, kilometers from its source. This means they had mental maps of their territory. They knew where the good stuff was. They planned trips to quarry it. Or it might suggest they had trade networks with other Neanderthal groups. Either way, it shows a level of planning and resource management that goes far beyond simple opportunism. They weren't just living in the moment, they were planning for the future, ensuring they had the raw materials for the tools they would need. And they didn't just work with stone. The archaeological record is biased towards stone because it preserves so well. As wood and bone rot away, but we have found tantalizing clues that they were skilled workers of organic materials too. In Germany, a site called Leringen yielded an incredible find, a 2.4-meter-long spear made of yew wood, found among the ribs of an extinct elephant. The spear's tip was fire-hardened. This wasn't just a pointy stick. It was a carefully crafted weapon made from a specific wood chosen for its properties. More recently, at a site in Italy called Poggetti Vecchi, researchers found 170,000-year-old digging sticks. They were made of boxwood, a very hard, dense wood, and shaped with fire and stone tools. They were used for digging up roots or maybe hunting small animals. These finds show us that a whole world of Neanderthal technology, the world of wood, is almost entirely lost to us. The same was once thought to be true of bone. For decades, it was a paleoanthropological rule of thumb. Neanderthals used bone as crude hammers, but they didn't make specialized shaped bone tools. That was a hallmark of modern humans. Then came the discovery of the lissoir. A lissoir is a specialized tool, a type of smoother made from an animal rib. It's used to work fresh animal hides to make them more pliable, supple, and waterproof. And archaeologists began finding them at Neanderthal sites dating to before modern humans arrived in Europe. This was a revelation. It was a specialized tool, not for butchery or hunting, but for a secondary craft and leatherworking. Making a lissoir isn't a simple act. You have to select the right bone, shape it, and polish it. It shows that Neanderthals had a wider range of crafts and technologies than we ever gave them credit for. Perhaps the most stunning evidence of Neanderthal technological prowess comes not from stone, wood, or bone, but from chemistry. We have clear evidence that Neanderthals manufactured the world's first synthetic material, birch-bark tar. This was a Stone Age superglue. They used it to attach, or haft, stone points to their wooden spears. A spear with a hafted point is far deadlier and more durable than one that is just tied on with sinew. The sinew gets wet, it stretches, it rots. The glue holds firm. But making this glue is not a simple process. You cannot make birch-bark tar by accident. You have to harvest bark from birch trees. Then you have to heat it in an oxygen-deprived environment to between 340 and 400 degrees Celsius. Too cold, and the tar won't form. Too hot, and it just burns to ash. How did they do this? Experiments suggest they likely dug a pit, placed rolls of birch bark inside, lit a fire on top, and covered the whole thing with earth to restrict the oxygen. The heat would cause the tar to liquefy and drip down into a collecting container buried at the bottom of the pit. This is a multi-stage process that requires precise temperature control and a deep understanding of material properties. You can't see what's happening, you just have to know the process and trust it. It's chemistry. It's a procedure that had to be invented, refined, and then taught. Finding a stone point with traces of 200,000-year-old birch-bark tar on its base is like finding a circuit board in a fossil bed. It fundamentally changes our assessment of their cognitive abilities. It shows abstract thought, complex planning, and the ability to follow a recipe. So, when we put all this together, what does it tell us about the Neanderthal mind? It tells us they were not just living hand-to-mouth. The Levallois technique shows they could think in abstract terms, hold a complex sequence of actions in their minds, and execute a plan. The transport of raw materials shows foresight and a sophisticated knowledge of their landscape. The woodworking shows an understanding of the properties of different natural materials. The Levallois show they had specialized crafts beyond basic survival, and the birch-bark tar shows a capacity for complex, multi-stage technological processes that we once thought was our exclusive domain. Their technology also shows us that their culture was not monolithic. The Mousterian wasn't exactly the same everywhere. Archaeologists have identified different variations. Some sites have a high percentage of scrapers. Others have a lot of hand axes, still others have many small points. These different flavors of the Mousterian might represent different cultural traditions passed down in different clans or regions. Or they might represent different tasks. A camp focused on hunting might leave behind more spear points, while a camp focused on processing hides would have more scrapers. Either way, it shows flexibility. They weren't robots, programmed to make the same tool over and over. They adapted their technology to their local environment and their specific needs. This is a very human trait. But the final, and most contentious, chapter in the story of Neanderthal tools happens at the very end of their time on Earth. Around 45,000 years ago, a new group of people arrived in Europe, our direct ancestors, Homo sapiens. And with them, they brought a new kind of technology known as the Aurignacian. This toolkit was different. It was based on the production of long, thin blades from a core, a more efficient way of getting cutting edge from a piece of stone. A wider variety of tools, including new kinds of scrapers and burins, engraving tools. Crucially, it included the first clear evidence of things like bone needles for sewing tailored clothing, and projectile weapons like spear throwers or atlatls, which allowed them to hunt from a safer distance. And of course, they brought art. Right at this time of transition, a new and different tool industry appears in the record, associated with the very last Neanderthals. It's called the Châtelperronian. It's a strange hybrid. It has elements of the old Mousterian tradition, like the use of flakes. But it also has new things, like long blades and, most surprisingly, personal ornaments. At a site in France called the Grotte du Renne, Châtelperronian layers have yielded Neanderthal remains alongside bone awls, pendants made from animal teeth, and ivory rings. This has created one of the biggest debates in paleoanthropology. Did Neanderthals invent the Châtelperronian on their own? Was this a final, independent flowering of their own innovative capacity, perhaps spurred on by the climate change or the arrival of new competitors? If so, it proves they were capable of symbolic thought, of making jewelry, of having a sense of personal identity expressed through objects. Or did they simply copy what they saw the newly arrived modern humans doing? Was the Châtelperronian a crude imitation, a cargo cult, where they saw their new neighbors with their shiny objects and tried to make their own without understanding the cultural context? The imitation argument suggests that they were still, at their core, less cognitively advanced. They could see and copy, but not truly innovate in this new symbolic way. The timing is certainly suspicious. For hundreds of thousands of years, no pendants. Then modern humans show up, and suddenly, pendants appear in Neanderthal sites. But the independent invention argument points out that the Châtelperronian tools are not just copies of Aurignacian ones. They are made differently, with techniques that seem to be a logical development from their own Mousterian past. They took their old knowledge and adapted it to make new things. Perhaps the most likely scenario is something in the middle. It wasn't a case of one-way copying. For a few thousand years, these two types of humans lived in the same landscape. They must have encountered each other. There was likely a period of cultural exchange, a flow of ideas in both directions. The Neanderthals saw new things, and being the intelligent and adaptable people they were, they incorporated those new ideas into their own culture in their own way. They weren't just mimics, they were participants in a changing world. So, how advanced were Neanderthal tools? They were advanced enough to allow them to survive and thrive for over 350,000 years in some of the harshest environments ever inhabited by humans. Their core technology, the Levallois technique, was a brilliant and efficient solution to the problem of making sharp tools, and it reveals a mind capable of abstract thought and long-term planning. They were masters of their materials, from stone to wood to bone. They were chemists who invented the first artificial adhesive. Their technology was not the same as that of the modern humans who replaced them. It was less diverse. They don't seem to have invented projectile weapons, sewing needles, or fishhooks. Their world was focused on the big game of the interior, and their technology reflects that. Their toolkit was a powerful, specialized system for a particular way of life. The story of their tools is really the story of our own prejudices. We started with the image of a club because we wanted to believe we were the smart ones, the chosen ones, the pinnacle of evolution. We looked at their tools and saw sameness, stagnation, and simplicity because that's what we expected to see. But as we looked closer, with better methods and more open minds, a different picture emerged. We saw foresight, planning, and skill. We saw innovation, the creation of glue. We saw craft in the working of hides. We saw culture in the regional variations of their toolkits. Their tools weren't primitive. They were appropriate. They were successful. And they were the product of a mind that was, in its own way, as complex and capable as our own. The Neanderthal is not a clumsy first draft. He is a different version of humanity, a skilled and intelligent survivor, and the evidence is right there in the stones he left behind.